The Hanseatic League was a trading and defensive confederation, and it was established along the coast of northern Europe, and its golden age was from around 1370 to the beginning of the 15th century. It was a powerful economic and defensive alliance that left a great cultural and agricultural heritage. The league was formed when merchants from different areas began to form the Hansa, which were groups, and they had the intention of trading with towns overseas, especially in the economically less developed eastern Baltic. This area was a source of many materials such as fur, timber, and wax. Through its existence, the Hansa emerged with formal agreements for confederation and cooperation covering the trade routes of west and east, with the capital city being Lübeck in present-day Germany. This is the city where the Hanseatic League acquired its official structure and origin. The separate towns raised their own armies, with groups requiring to enlist men into the military. The cities also helped each other in crisis and sought to interact with each other. Also, social networks played a big role in the development of the Hans, and network formation played a big role for business purposes of Hanseatic merchants. Although it was good while it lasted, eventually its situation became difficult because of the formation of modern states and increasing competition. The Hansa were a group of cities and towns throughout northern Europe along the Baltic Sea, with the highest concentration in northern Germany, not many locations in Scandinavia. These cities and towns were connected with common goals of economic and trade benefits between them. Mercantilism was a driving force for negotiations and agreements between those cities. Some of the most prominent ones included Lübeck, Hamburg, Bremen, and Danzig, and many other cities varied in wealth and size. Each city found it beneficial to join the league and agreed to certain trade stipulations that are decided among members. Often the most powerful cities' rulers would have more authority in decision-making revolving around trade policies. Commercial expansion. Lübeck's physical location on the coast of the Baltic Sea was one main factor that provided lots of access to trade with other regions like Scandinavia and cities like Visby in present-day Sweden. Besides these cities, this northern European region got interconnected through more than a hundred cities, bringing about a solid network of alliances. Also, as told in the article companion to the Hanseatic League, a constant increase in population, a huge expansion of arable land, the foundation of hundreds of towns, and a sustained economic growth formed the socio-economic background of what was a significant societal takeoff in the High Middle Ages. A further result of this process was the re-establishment of long-distance trade, which supports the reasoning behind this significant expansion throughout the Third Wave civilizations. Additionally, a major economic advantage for the Hansa was its control of the shipbuilding market, as they sold ships everywhere, boosting their economy based on what would suit them best. However, the Hanseatic Compromise was not solely based on outside trade and affairs. As explained in the article, the, the German Hansa and Bergen, apart from being active in trade, they were also involved in politics by being part of the town council or being envoys to negotiations with the other towns and rulers. This meant that they could exert both economic and political influence on Hanseatic trade. This explains how many internal debates and negotiations took place all throughout the Hanseatic Trade League between cities or groups of cities who associate more than one another. Both economic and political negotiations took place between many Hanseatic towns and regions. The Khanters, for example, existed many conflicting ideologies or cultures due to being located in outside non-Hanseatic states. Conflicts even between the Hanseatic Khanters had to be resolved by ensuring there was as little interference as possible. Outside conflict with many different groups was common for the Hansa, as they were faced with conflict on a daily basis. The Norwegians thought of the Hansa as immoral to women, and even murderers. These two groups were in constant conflict with each other, but despite this, the Hansa knew that this constant struggle with each other would result in severe repercussions with their status in Khanter. Knowing this, the Hansa and Norwegians found ways to coexist with each other. Primary sources: The Hansa made a request to forbid English merchants from trading within the Roman Empire, and that they must leave under penalty of sanctions, and that they can no longer land in any port or they will be arrested and their goods will be confiscated, emphasizing the conflict between the two entities. The English have tried to communicate with the Emperor about these requests, but they have had no response and have suggested to stop trade within the Hansa and have them leave their domain, as described in the passage from a book called Europe of the North Sea and the Baltic, The World of the Hanse by Fons Mercator. Whereas
An order has been addressed by the Roman Emperor to all the electors, prelates, counts, and other dignitaries and subjects of the empire, enumerating various complaints made by the associate towns of the German Hans, relative to various torts suffered by them in their kingdom, whereas a complaint has been lodged by them against the company of adventurer merchants, whereas no reply has been given to the said Hanseatic towns, such complaints being manifestly unjustified and unable to be supported by any proof, whereas by that order the English merchants, i.e. the adventure merchants, are forbidden to trade within the empire and are ordered to leave it under penalty of sanctions, may no longer land, openly or secretly, in any port or in loading dock, and may in no way recommence by sea or land within the empire, under penalty of being arrested and having their goods confiscated, not to speak of other extreme sentences pronounced against our said subjects.
Primary source number 2. Hanseatic compromise also frequented states for the benefit of trade. Without a proper amount of compromise between parties in trade negotiations, trade itself would not function properly. A deal of compromise between the Hanse and Novgorod is discussed in the book A Treaty of Novgorod with the Hanseatic towns by George Vernadsky.
Likewise, the German envoys concluded an agreement with the Novgorod Possednik Boris Irovich, and with the Novgorod Tisiatsky Fyodor Yakovlevich, and with the merchant elders Alexander and Ephraim, and all the merchant sons, and all of the Novgorod Great, for all the 73 towns and all the merchantry, to the effect that the people of Novgorod should have free passage to travel to the German land and to the German towns by land and by water, to come and go with their goods in accordance with the old treaties and in accordance with the old oaths sworn upon the cross, and in accordance with this treaty and by this agreement without any deceit.
Professor Wayne Postal believed that clashes with Denmark proved Lubeck and the Hanseatic towns were unable to preserve the influence over the Scandinavian countries like they had achieved in 1370. On the other hand, disagreement and disunity within the Hanse obviously in most cases led only the most affected towns to be active. Here, and more often, these were the Wendish towns, and in essence, primarily interested in the Baltic trade, the Scandinavian privileges, and frequently acting politically or militarily for the entire Hanse, joining in conflicts alongside them. Contrarily, when discussing Johann Schreiner's beliefs and research on the Hanseatic influence in Scandinavia, Bola Verlag, in the book The German Hanse and Bergen, Verlag states that his most controversial theory is that the Hanse towns used Norwegian independence on Hanseatic grain to pressure Norway into the political union with Denmark in 1380, and keep Norway there in the following period. Hanse influence in Scandinavian politics must be mentioned in order to show the great economic and political importance Schreiner attributed to the Hanse. Then going on to explain the strength of Hanse influence on the negotiations and compromises or dealings of Scandinavian states. After the Hanseatic League's golden age, as stated in the article The Hanse in Medieval and Modern Europe on page 64, its situation soon became increasingly difficult because of the formation of modern states and increasing competition. It only partly maintained its position in the wars with Denmark, Holland, Zealand, and England, and its privileges were not automatically renewed, and the merchants from England and elsewhere demanded equal rights in the Baltic. This quote explains that outside influences eventually caused the Hanseatic Leagues many difficulties. The article also supports that and says the decline and dissolution of the Hanseatic League was a gradual process, while the collective alliance as an institution was increasingly less able to monopolize the trade of the North and Baltic Sea realms, or rather to direct and dictate the conditions of trade policy. Individual cities like Hamburg and Danzig rose up during the 16th and 17th centuries to become important centers of trade. This quote explains that the balkanization of the League was due to the vulnerability and how that caused the emergence of other rivals like the Swedish Empire in the 1500s. In conclusion, the Hanseatic Trade League had many interactions all throughout Europe, and not all were productive encounters. Most of the time, the Hanse engaged in conflicts with other states, which resulted in reduced productivity for both the Hanse and conflicting states. However, the Hanse realized that this increased conflict with others was detrimental to their economic growth, so they had to make agreements and compromises that would benefit both of them. Not only did the Hanse have conflict with other states, but with themselves too. They often had debates between Hanseatic towns and regions for more political or economic power. Overall, the Hanse often engaged in conflict with other states and even themselves, which ultimately led to the collapse of such a great league.